Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to open this this new event, the UrbanSus event, within the global cities of the Institute of Advanced Studies. Today, the event is about urban atmosphere, emissions impacts, and trends of welfare in cities. We have the organizers were members of our team that work with us as postdocs and or worked with us as postdocs and already lived, but continue to work in the team of the urban of the global cities center of synthesis. The UrbanSus event is a special event, is the most important event that we have in our center of synthesis. Is an event that produces not only the talks that you are going to hear today, but also it produces a video. So we are being filmed now, and if you would like to send the talks to somebody who is relevant in the area, would like to see in the future, this event, this video will be in the Center of Synthesis website. It also produces a text that is quite important for us. Is we call it a critic report, relatório crítico in Portuguese. And today we have 3 of our members participating as redactors of this critic report. Those are Dr. Jessica Nogueira Silva, Dr. Telmo Branco Filho, and Dr. Júlio Chiqueto. I would like to thank Júlio Chiqueto especially for having the idea in organizing all the meeting. You can ask questions. These questions will be sent to one of our members and then addressed to Professor Fátima Andrade, who I would like to thank very much for accepting to coordinate the whole section. So welcome you all in the name of the Center of Synthesis. And I will now pass the word to Professor Fátima.
Thank you. Good afternoon for everybody, and it's nice to have all you here. I don't know how many people are attending, but I'm sure it will be very interesting. And only to complement, if you want to ask some questions, it can be in English or in Portuguese, because sometimes people don't ask because of the language, but it can ask in Portuguese, then it's okay, we will translate. And then we are going to start. This meeting, we are going to have people with a high experience in urban questions, and also we can see here that we are going to have a lot of opportunity to discuss many important points. We are going to have the presentations by Professor Otto Klemm, Professor Guaciara Macedo dos Santos, Professor Marcos Buckeridge, that has started this meeting. And instead of Professor Patrícia Iglesias, we are going to have Professor Marilyna Martinez from our environmental agency that is going to present because Professor Patrícia Iglesias had a problem, is with a problem of a health problem. And I'd like to thank all of you to be here to discuss with us, and I hope that we have many questions and you can have the opportunity to discuss this interesting area. And not to lose more time, I will ask Professor Otto Klemm to start. Professor Otto Klemm is Professor of Climatology at the University of Münster in Germany. His research interests are in general climatology, air pollution, micrometeorology, aerosol particles, as well as physics and chemistry of fog. He teaches at the undergraduate and graduate levels in all these areas, and he studied geoecology, environmental science at the University of Bayern in Germany, and where he got his PhD in '88. He spent a postdoc period with the University of Delaware, College of Marine Studies in the United States, and with the University of New Hampshire also in the United States from late 90 to 91. And after that, he accepted a senior research position at the Fraunhofer Institute for Atmospheric Environmental Research in Germany. There, he continued his airborne research activities. From 1996 to 2002, he returned to the University of Beirut. I'm sure I'm not saying the right name, but that's an Institute for Terrestrial Ecosystem Research, before accepting the professorship in Münster. You can see by this mini CV that Professor Otto Klemm has a lot of experience, and I'd like to thank you very much to be here and to have time with us discussing all these subjects. And the title of the presentation will be Urban Air Pollution as Measured with a Cargo Bicycle. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you, Fatima. Thank you, Giulio Cecchetto. Thank you, everyone else, for having me here. And I believe you do this in English language for me, or because of me. Anyway, I appreciate being here, and I really I like to be here, and it's so easy now in these times to participate in a meeting in Brazil, although I'm in Germany myself. So I start sharing my screen. Can you see that? Can you see the presentation? Okay. So the title was being presented, Air Pollution is Measured with a Cargo Bicycle. And I want to show you some aspects of what we do with that, and also share some thoughts about what we are planning to do in the future with a cargo bicycle. But first, I think I need to introduce the city of Münster a little bit. If you see this map of Germany here, Münster here is in the northwest. It's kind of close to the Netherlands, and this is a city with about 300,000 inhabitants. So in Brazilian standards, that's a small village, I believe. And in German standards, it's a middle-sized city. And we have little industry, a lot of administration people here. So not too much air pollution from industry, almost zero. And it used to be the bicycle capital of Germany, and wants to get this title again in the future. So there's a lot of bicycling going on here, which also mirrors a little bit the fact that we are very close to the Netherlands, because bicycling is very famous and very active and very fashionable in the Netherlands. If you look closer, that is one of these satellite images of Google. You see the municipality of Münster. It's flat terrain, more or less, throughout, some ways, but not too much, which is enabling the bicycling in the city, of course. That's where I'm right now. And you see a little lake here. It's an artificial lake. It's not very deep, only like 2 or 3 meters, more like 2 than 3 meters. But it's the main wind direction from southwest, and that's where fresh air may come into town. Münster is famous for its large number of churches. So there are a lot of jokes in German language about the number of churches in Münster, and you hear the church bells ringing frequently. As I said before, it's famous for its bicycles. I was impressed when I first came here. I thought it's a different environment, and it kind of is a different environment. A bicycle is very strong, very, very strong here. And you see this bike route here. It's a mixed bicycle and pedestrian route, and it's going around the circle, around town here. This used to be the medieval wall of the city, and it's not a wall anymore, but the around this around here there's this pathway, which we call promenade. And that's, as I said, a bicycling and pedestrian way, and that's very convenient. For example, if I want to go from here to the train station with a bike, I go to there and then either this way or that way. So if you go biking, you go totally different routes than if you go with a car or with a public bus or by walking. So it's really quite impressive. But there are also streets. This photo was taken on one of these larger streets. It's not very busy, at least at the time that the photo was taken. But you see, of course, there's also lots of street traffic in just around town. What you see here is one of these pollution control containers, which is run by the state office, which is called Lahnhof here in the western part of Germany. And they're observing ozone and nitrogen oxides and PM and all these air pollutants all the time. And what we see here is a time series since 2007, and the PM10 yearly averages are from like 31, 32, coming further down until numbers like below 20 today. And the European threshold is 40 micrograms per cubic meter as a yearly maximum allowed level. And we see that we are well below that. And that actually applies for, I believe, all sites in Germany. Some are further down, some maybe here, but I think all of them, maybe there's one or two exceptions in Germany, but we are all below these thresholds, which is really, really good news. So we may think, well, it's fine now, it's everything is okay, but who is living nearby this station? Well, there are some people living here, but of course not the majority of the people. And a lot of people go biking, for example, or go live in other places, and these air pollution control stations are. So we started like 4 years ago. We started to instrument cargo bicycles. You may have seen one of these bicycles. There are different styles, but this is the style we like most. It has 2 wheels, and this cargo platform can carry up to like 50 kilograms or more of equipment. And we measure with that air pollution, greenhouse gases, and also micrometeorology. We instrument the bicycle with temperature gauge and humidity, and with the 3-dimensional wind directions. You see this is a sonic anemometer. So we measure the wind in 3 horizontal, 2 horizontal and 1 vertical direction. And we measure that quite fast, like once per second. We also can measure CO2 and methane not together with the other ones for some reasons, but we can also make greenhouse gas measurements on this type of cargo bike. And what I'm talking about today is about particle mass concentrations. So that's PM10, PM2.5, and PM1. And also the particle number concentration, which is a different metric than the particle mass concentration, but I will show you more details about that in a few minutes. In future applications, we want to include NO and NO2, but we haven't found the money at the time to do that yet. But there are instruments available at the moment which you can also run on such a unit with little enough power consumption and so forth, and still very high quality. So these are very top instruments, but you can, we hope to implement them in the future. But the particle mass concentrations and also the number concentrations, that's advanced instrumentation. So there's a different approach than the citizen science approach, which is trying to use inexpensive instrumentation. So this is a different approach here. We have been doing this for a number of years now, and we started to do that with the students, and they typically have their project report in form of a poster presentation. So this first one was about the CO2 concentration, means how the variability is, and where the hotspots are, and so forth. The next one was about the urban heat island effect. So the temperature was mapped more or less, which was a very nice and interesting study projects by a group of students. The next one was about the highly variable aerosol concentrations in Münster. So I will show you some results from that. And that's when we started to do the aerosol measurements, as I said. We had a scientist visiting from Argentina, Emi Carreras, and she also made quite a few runs with bike. And together with her, we did publish our approach and presented some first results to the international literature, and also making sure that we are demonstrating that we did that at the time, and we were successful by doing this. And then you will see the presentation. We'll have the DOE here, and then you can search for the presentation. At the moment, there's a master thesis going on with a student, Florian Kohler, and he's running a methane instrument on the bike. In the back here, there's a castle of Münster, which is the main administration of the university. It's a nice photo shooting place. And anyway, Instagram place. Anyway, this is the methane instrumentation, which is not made for this application, but it runs really, really well and works perfectly fine. But I cannot show you results from that approach today. Then there was a bachelor thesis just submitted last month about the impacts of the lockdown on the aerosol particle concentrations, because we had a huge decrease of traffic, of course, during the lockdown last year. And this thesis is making analysis about that. And then there was also a student study project also about lockdown, but the next lockdown, which was this year. And they presented it in a presentation, which also you have a link here. You can look at that if you have the presentation later on. But it's in German language, so too bad. But also there is a video which was made, and I want to show you a little bit of that video, only like 40 seconds. So for that purpose, I will go out of this presentation now here. And
yeah.
Can you see it? Can they see the bicycle?
Mm-hmm.
So it's muted, so I tell you the story behind it. So it's a sort of commercial. It's made by the press office of the university. It's about sustainability, and you see the castle again. All right, so what you see here, the street, that's the Promenade Street in the winter situation without the leaves. And you see two bikers, one with the cargo bike and the companion. I told them to go together in case of a flat tire or something. They should not leave alone the cargo bike because it's truly expensive what is on there. And so you got a little impression of how that works, I hope. And now I plan to go back to my presentation, but we're here in the presentation again, right? Okay, good. So what they were doing, they searched, they selected two routes, two circular routes. The one which is presented in green color here is the low traffic route, which is the so-called promenade, which which is on the former medieval wall. Low traffic, bicycle traffic and pedestrian traffic, but not much more than that. And the other route was a high traffic route along the busy roads, more or less the same distance. And they started here and went to this route and then the other one, and then compared how the data were comparing to each other. And this is one of the results here, which is showing that I go back again so that you know which route is one or which route is which. Okay, so I go back so that you can picture yourself how that looks like. So this is sort of the upper circle, more or less, is the low traffic route, and the lower circle is the high traffic route. So the upper circle and the lower circle. And if you go here for the particle number concentration, we see that the upper circle here has sometimes high concentrations, but like here when there's street intersections, there are sometimes high concentrations, but most of it is yellow color, which means there's not very high concentrations. But on the high traffic routes, you have a lot of high concentrations. We are very close to traffic emissions, and the concentrations are, as I said, high, and they can be really, really high, sometimes actually above the detection possibility of the instrument. So that is understandable. That's not surprising. What is more surprising that the PM mass concentration here on the low traffic road, on the high traffic road, are not much different from each other. It's almost the same. So there's only a little difference between these two routes, and that's actually showing in almost all the rides they made. So there were many rides that have been done, and it often shows like that the mass concentrations are not much different from each other. So the mass concentrations, they are not so much dominated by the traffic as the number concentrations. You can see that again here. So on the left-hand side, this is a high traffic route, and on the right-hand side, there's a low traffic route of one ride, and the PM mass concentrations, they are here along here. So the dark line is a running median. It's more or less the same throughout, with some exceptions, of course, but the number concentrations, they are much higher here than on the low traffic route. So that is quite impressive, I find. So I do come to the conclusions and want to say that the number concentrations, as I said, are much higher at the high traffic route than at the low traffic route. But the mass concentrations are not much different at the two routes. And now, if we consider that it's the fine particles with diameters below 100 nanometers that make most of the number concentrations, and these are the ones which are going deep into the lung and are toxicologic relevance, and they make up the number concentrations, but they do not contribute much to the mass concentration. But the mass concentration is what is legally limited. So the legal limits of PM10 or PM2.5 or even PM1, they are not mirroring very well the impact of traffic on the air pollution in terms of toxicology of atmospheric aerosols. So the legal regulations do not well reflect the toxic relevance of the aerosol pollution, and which actually means, if you think it further, that the particle number concentrations should be introduced as an additional air pollution control metric, in addition to the PM concentrations. And with that, I hope I stayed in time, and I thank you for your attention, and I'm open, of course, for answering any questions if there would be any. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Otto Klemm. The presentation was amazing. I'm sure we have many questions, but according to our program here, we are going to have the questions at the end of the presentations, when we are going to have the debate.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And now I would like to invite Professor Guaciara Macedo dos Santos. Professor Guaciara is a researcher at the University of California in Irvine, at the CAC Carbon Cycle Accelerator Mass Spectrometer Facility. She has been elected Federal Fluminense University for Outstanding Academic Achievement Performance, and is chair of the International Scientific Advisory Committee and member of the Board of Directors of the André Lalonde Accelerator Mass Spectrometry Laboratory in Ottawa, Canada. Professor Glaciara research focuses on understanding multiple aspects of biogeochemistry, carbon cycling, developing research protocols for the analysis of geochemistry of compounds, such as black carbon, aerosol, and CO2-14 from tree rings and plant parts. Most recently, she has been working on 3 species from pan-tropical regions and sources of CO2 emissions at urban environments. Her work is based on more than 100 referee scientific publications, plus many abstracts and conference presentations. Professor Glaciara can explain better also his relation with the Federal University, the university here in Rio de Janeiro. And she will also is going to talk about using hydrocarbon and IP leaves as a proxy for surface air fossil CO2 estimate in Rio de Janeiro state. So, thank you very much, Professor Glaciara. And if people want to make questions, can make your questions here in the chat. We have the address for putting your questions and the email address to send the questions for us. Now, please, Professor Glaciara.
Thank you, Fatima, for the introduction, and thank you for the organizers for the opportunity to give this talk. I'm going now to open my talk, and let's see if I can share. Am I allowed to share? Let's see if I'm... Okay.
Yes.
Okay, let's see. Share here. All right. So I have done this work a few years ago in Rio de Janeiro, was actually in 2015, and is using radiocarbon as a proxy to looking surface air fossil fuel CO2 estimates for the state. So first I would like to lay out some facts. Global temperature anomalies have been increasing, and we are seeing an increase of 1 degree increase since the pre-industrial times. And this increase is mostly due to greenhouse gas emissions, and these emissions are in fact related to human activities. So here I have a short video. I don't know if it's running properly, but I hope so is. One of the most powerful greenhouse gases is actually CO2, carbon dioxide. And although carbon dioxide can be produced naturally, is also produced from human activities. We have deforestation, land use changes, industrial processes, and of course fossil fuel combustion and use. And that has been changing dramatically along over the years. So carbon dioxide are mostly produced in urban areas, and global urban areas are increasing, they are growing. In this plot, I'm showing how population increasing since 1950. So in 2020, we have already urban areas had jumped to 56%, and we expect that in 2050, we'll have 69% in population. So how is doing South America? We have already 3 mega cities in South America, 2 of them in Brazil. Mega cities is what we call metropolitan areas that has more than 10 million people. One of them is in São Paulo, the second one is in Rio de Janeiro. So why urban areas are important is because they are impacting the Earth system. They less than 1% on land area. However, they have most of the population, more than 56%, as I already mentioned, most of the GDP, more than 66% of the energy use, and obviously a large amount of fossil fuel CO2 emissions. So it's important to understand how fossil fuel CO2 emissions are produced and estimate them at the level of policy relevant scales for accountability, visibility, and management, so that we can give some kind of feedback. So how we can do that? There are a few types of measurements that can be done. Some of them called top-down. Measurement type is atmospheric measurements, and in the bottom-up. Top-down type of measurements, you can use satellite images, but this type of measurements, they are large-scale measurements. They don't give a lot of information of regional information. You can use also aircraft measurement type and also mobile measurements, but they cannot differentiate properly or fossil fuel CO2 from biomass CO2. And bottom up, you can use activity-based data that can give information of a regional and also much large scale information, but it uses the same data sets provided by the governments. You can use in situ type of a CO2 network, so greenhouse gas networks. That's quite powerful and useful, but this type of information is just right now dedicated to some few cities. So alternative way to obtain that information from related to fossil fuel CO2 emissions is actually using annual plants. In absence of a greenhouse gas networks, we can use annual plants because, well, they fix the CO2. And because of fossil fuel CO2 is depleted in carbon-14, the plant doesn't know any difference. So we'll fix the CO2, and if the plants are near sources, you're going to see a huge difference between these plants in urban areas from clean air. And they can give a time-integrated information, which you can translate in fossil fuel CO2 in ppm. So to give an example, I chose here a paper that was published in 2008, where show fossil fuel carbon dioxide emissions in California that was done using annual grasses. So we can have measurements covering the entire state, carbon-14, and then you translate to fossil fuel CO2. So using the same concept, so then I try the same thing for the state of Rio de Janeiro, using then EP leaves. And the goal of the work was to see if it was initially possible. So the state is actually relatively large. It's divided in 8 regions. And we knew some information about the peak density, GDP. The municipality was already emitting a lot of CO2 as obviously equivalent, CO2 equivalent information in 2005, and it has already pledged reduce that emissions by 20% in 2020. I place here with some pictures I found in the web showing photos how the city has changed, some tourist areas, how the city has changed from 1960 to today. And you can see how the vegetation cover has been removed, and then you have the city growth. Why EP leaves? EP is very popular deciduous trees. It has species varieties that with beautiful flowers. So you can actually find them in parks, in residential areas, in several homes. So they are widely spread in a state. It's important to know when the leaves are growing. So they grow from late September until next May and June. And we have to collect the leaves from urban environments and also clean air to make the comparisons. And for this proof of a concept, we also had made measurements of carbon-13 to show that the results, the isotopic value was homogeneous. The chemical processing to clean the leaves is quite simple because it's just some washes of acid and sodium hydroxide, so it doesn't take much time. And then we move to produce graphite for carbon-14 measurements, and the excess of the gas we use for delta-13 measurements. So next, I'm already going to show the map of what we had obtained. That was 158 measurements in total, covering 124 sites. So we have to make some assumptions. For instance, we assume that the delta carbon-14 value for the biomass on a state is equivalent to the background. And that's possible because there's a lot of agricultural activities in Rio de Janeiro. So the vegetation is removed and the forest, the remaining Atlantic forest is not enough to give a significant difference. We use Metropolis as the clean air site. The result match well with the global clean air value. We had the information of the total concentration, which we obtained from NOAA for 2015. And therefore, any changes of 2.5 per mil in carbon-14 was already equivalent to 1 ppm in excess of CO2, of a fossil signal. So that's the map that we obtained. The red areas is the hot spots, or the excess of fossil fuel, and we were quite surprised that they were concentrated around Guanabara Bay, not all over the city of Rio de Janeiro. And we also have some hot spots on the valley after the Serra do Mar, and also on the edge of the state near the São Paulo. So we then, after you have a map, you can compare this excess of fossil CO2 with the features. So we compare with the topographical features and the wind pattern. We know that the state of Rio de Janeiro is quite interesting because has this mountains, and the Serra do Mar basically divided the state in an inland and coastal area. And we also have other mountains in the edge of the state that also make some kind of pockets, creating some, allowing some plumes coming from São Paulo be trapped here. So we believe that these hot spots in this area here could be some of the fossil fuel CO2 dynamic, the air being trapped in this region. We also have the same effect probably coming here from Minas Gerais. We compare then our map with point sources. This map here, the second map, is a little bit busy because we add here thermoelectrics, hydroelectrics, the nuclear power plants, areas of agriculture, and the lakes, and so on. Rio de Janeiro State electrical power plants, different than São Paulo, actually still use a lot of fossil fuel as main fuel, natural gas and diesel. So the distribution of fuel is actually quite high, 70% is fossil. So it's quite possible that a lot of these emissions are coming from that. Nuclear contributions are basically limited to the Sepetiba Bay. and it's not more than beyond the 5 kilometers from the area of the station, the plant station. So as some of the take-home messages here, which was published in a journal of city and environment interactions, is that radiocarbon measurements of mature EPA leaves were successful to show that we can actually obtain fossil fuel CO2 excess across the state. This information was observed close, obviously, to roads, industrial complexes. You see the excess on these areas. Is worse where the local air circulation is poor, especially around Guanabara Bay. We also see very high fossil fuel CO2 close to the valley on the mountain, although we have a few points here and in the edge of the state. Lower fossil fuel CO2 emissions was found in the lake region and on the northeast, because the type of activities that they have in this region. And other microregions are mostly impacted by traffic and industrial daily emissions. Finally, those are important to effectively achieve a target to 13.3. We believe that cities are the main factor. We can change this type of emissions, reduce them. This is already happening to some cities at some level. Obviously, we are not there yet, but by making changes, it's possible to reach there. Radiocarbon annual plants is useful. They allow to implement a very robust fossil fuel CO2 monitoring network, especially when you don't have a greenhouse gas emission network, which is the case for many places. And is a way that will allow us to build the knowledge and capacity for meet climate change, which we need. I would like to finish thank you to many colleagues, especially Julia Chiqueto, that participate in this work, which we publish in climate and environment. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward for the questions later on.
Thank you very much, Professor Guaciara Macedo. It was amazing, the results. I would like to talk later about the results and also
fantastic
to see some collaborations. I think it would be really interesting. But now we are going to have another presentation by Professor Marcos Buckeridge. Professor Marcos Buckeridge here at the USP, he is a full professor at the Institute of Biosciences and the Institute of Advanced Studies at USP. His works focus on system biology, mainly with the application of network theory to understand the functioning of plants as a whole, aiming at applications in bioenergy and the environment. Currently, he also develops research related to applied urban sciences, working mainly on the development of public policies based on scientific knowledge for application in the urban environment. He is director of the USP Bioscience Institute until 2022. At the IEA, the Institute of Advanced Studies, he coordinates the USP Global Cities Synthesis Center. Please, Professor Marcos.
Okay, thank you very much, Fatima, and also Julio for the invitation. My point today here is about using trees as sensors for pollution. I left my slides in Portuguese and I will speak in English so that people that don't speak English could follow and make questions. Well, I'll go directly to the type of sensor. is the same as in the previous section. Trees are very good sensors, and I would like to convince you that they are indeed very good sensors for certain types of pollutants that occur in cities. The cities in trees, they have several functions. They can interfere with the particulate material, for example. They also produce volatiles that can interfere in the formation of clouds. They give shadow. They reduce with these, they reduce the temperature. They also decrease the surface of evaporation of water in the city. So there are several functions that the trees play in a city, and that's why having trees in a city is very important for health and also for keeping a better environment for humans. I will focus today on São Paulo City. We had a talk on Münster and another on Rio de Janeiro. Now I'll show you a little bit what we have been done in São Paulo, and I would like here to recognize my co-author, the co-author of this talk, that is Giuliano Locoselli, who was wonderful, a exquisite postdoctoral fellow that worked in my lab for 4 years. So everything that I'm going to show is done together with Giuliano. São Paulo is a mosaic city, is a very big city, and the distribution of trees, I calculated this in 2015, distribution of trees is unequal, as happens to practically all the big cities in the world, except for Singapore, that is different. Usually only 20%, maximum 20% of the surface of a city will be covered by trees. In Singapore, it's much more, it's almost 30%. And the covering can be also very asymmetric in cities. One of the worst in the planet, as far as we know, from only a few cities, is Paris, for example. It's very the distribution is very unequal. In São Paulo as well, we can see here in black. We can see regions. This is the number of trees per inhabitants. We can see that this region is really very poor, but there are certain regions, like the region where I am now, where the campus of the University of São Paulo is, that is much higher than the other side of the city. And there are regions with forests. This is not very fair to take in account, but this is a forest, and so there are just a few people there. But in the real urban area, there is a mosaic, and we have already calculated how many trees we could have more than we have. And this, I will try to show to you that for certain types of pollution, specifically the heavy metals, people who live in this area surrounded in black will have their health affected more than people who live in this region that is surrounded by blue. São Paulo has about 650,000 trees, and the production of water by evapotranspiration is quite important. It is equivalent to 15% of the water that flows through the city in the main river, that is the River Pinheiros, or 3% of the second main river, that is River Tietê. And there are also the surrounding forests that are very important. They can be several times the amount of water that the river flow. Like, for example, the Cantareira forest is 12 times more 12 rivers, 12 Pinheiros rivers crossing the city. One of the first papers we published on that was about the tree rings. We used the tree rings of one of the main species that occur in São Paulo, that is Tipuana tipu. About 80%, 70 to 80% of the trees in the streets of São Paulo are from this species. So we used the wood, and we measured certain metals using a special technique that I will show you. What happens in the wood? You can see here that the living part of the wood is this part in blue here that is transporting the water, and the substances like heavy metals, for example, they can be dissolved in water and they spread through the cells of the trunk, and we can see a gradient of the metals that are being deposited, are left deposited in the wood. Here you see a picture of the wood, one of the rings here. This is equivalent to about 1 year. And when we measure, for example, zinc or plum, we can see peaks of storage of these heavy metals in the wood. You can see in the picture on the right, you can see here also that they are deposited in certain cells. But we can integrate these peaks, and we can visualize and calculate the concentration of several metals. We measured several different heavy metals. I'm just taking zinc and plum here as an example to make easier for you to understand what we do. So this is the technique is laser ablation. So a very thin layer of the wood is vaporized, and the metal is measured by ACPMS, by a special method of mass spectrometry. And here you have a few years of the wood, just to give you as an example here of, again, zinc and plum again, showing that there are peaks, and we can calculate, for example, what happened in the past. So this graph here shows several of the metals that we measured. In this case here, all the metals we measured, and we can see that we because the city of São Paulo in the 80s lost the industry and expelled the industry to the periphery of the city or to the other cities in the conurbation. Then several of the metals like cadmium here decreased linearly. Cadmium decreased, sodium here is decreased as well, zinc. Plum is a special case because in 1989, Brazil ceased to use gasoline with plum. That was banned in Brazil, and we can clearly see here a decrease, a very strong decrease in plum. And this shows that our technique is really reliable for measuring the history of the city. So it's the message here is that we can have a temporal appreciation of what happened in the pollution in the past using wood. Another case is that looking at it from another side is that the trees can also be affected by the pollution. And we took one example that is a site of production, an industrial site that produces fuels, fossil fuels, and São Paulo, near São Paulo. And we sampled the trees here, and we measured the PM10 in this case. And you can see here in red, in certain in the regions that are very close to the production of the PM10, we have this red, the data here in red showing that the growth of the trees that we can measure using the tree rings very easily, the growth is decreased by 37%. So pollution, in this case, the pollution is a very strong pollution, and because of this, it serves to us as a good model to understand some effects on the trees as well as on the people. So we had, I will show you here a third paper that is now the spatial and the temporal variability in the same site. The spatial we can measure because the metals, it was discovered by the group of Professor Saldiva that the metals are stored in the bark of the trees. So we can use the bark as a measure of the spatial distribution of the metal pollution, and we can use the tree ring as a measure of the temporal distribution of the metals. So in this case, we use two species, not only Tipuana tipo that you can see here, but also Poincianella pluviosa, Escola de Sibipiruna, Tipuana and Sibipiruna. In the same region, as you can see here, we have the site of production of fuels here, and we sample the trees in regions with at different distances from the production. You can see here that to the east side, this shadow here is the production of the PM10, and the PM10 is a good marker of where the pollution is going and where the metals are going. The pollution is directly from the industrial site, but also from the trucks and all the equipment that they use very near the region. And there is, on the other hand, the pollution that you've just seen, that's the pollution within the city, the PM10 within the city and the metals that we find normally within the city. So when we look at this, I don't have time here to go into details, but what we found here is that there is an inequality that can be measured, an environmental inequality that leads to problems, health problems to the population that lives very near to this place or in certain directions in relation to this place. Like, for example, living these trees here that are to the west side, they receive much more pollution with PM10 and also with metals, whereas in the east side is less. And if you compare these two regions that are outside, the type of pollution as well is completely different. The metals are completely different. So the effects when we now go back and look at the distribution of the trees in the city of São Paulo in relation to the Human Development Index, here is the HDI on the left hand side. And we can see that the center of the city is much richer here. And this is the distribution of the trees in town. And when we superimpose, we can see that they are quite similar. So there is the regions with the higher HDI are the regions that have more trees. One of the consequences of this is on mortality of people, for example. This is the age of people, the average age of people that people die in São Paulo. And we can see that distribution is also very similar. Of course, there are many factors, not only the trees. there are several socioeconomic factors that influence this graph, but there is also a coincidence with the distribution of the trees, and maybe part of this effect is related to the protection that the trees, on one hand, the protection of the trees give to these people that live in these regions with more trees, or the exposition of to the pollution that people who live in regions like the east zone of São Paulo, which has much less trees, the surrounded by black that I showed you at the beginning. This could expose people to certain diseases that I don't have time to go deep in, but the case is that there is a correlation between pollution, trees, and the socioeconomic distribution in the cities. This is what I had to say. Thank you very much. My email is there. I would like to thank FAPESP for the investment in this project, Professor Paulo Saldiva, who coordinated that. I was a PI, and I also recognize the participation of Dr. Giuliano Locoselli. That was very valuable in producing a lot of this data.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's really interesting. All the presentations are complement each other. And now I'd like to invite Professor Marilyna Martinez. She holds a bachelor degree in chemistry at the University of São Paulo, with a specialization in environmental management from the Faculty of Public Health at USP, at the University of São Paulo. She works in CETESB, that's the environmental company of the state of São Paulo, since 1983. Now she occupies the position of manager of the Department of Environmental Quality since 2017. She has broad experience in the area of air quality through the coordination of the sectors that are responsible for the operation of the monitoring networks here in the state of São Paulo, the data quality control, interpretation of results, and consolidation of environmental data in reports related to air pollution. Now I would like to invite Professor Marilyna Martinez for the presentation, and thank you for being here, sharing her experience with us.
Sorry, I have a problem with the connection. I'm in my cell phone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm here representing Dra. Patrícia Iglesias, president of CETESB. She has a health problem, and so I'm here to talk with you about the air quality in São Paulo state. Next, please. Oh, thank you. Here is a little view about the São Paulo metropolitan area. This mega city with 22 million people. We have a fleet about 6.4 million vehicles. A great part of these vehicles are full with gasohol. That's a mixture with gasoline and ethanol. And you have about 1 million of motorcycles. It's a huge city, the huge metropolitan area. Next, please. Here we can see a good day, and a polluted day with a lot of problems of visibility. We have these days with high pollution levels are mainly in the winter, when that is the dry season of São Paulo, and some days in the winter you can see a picture like this. Next, please. We have a monitoring system since the 80s. We have our monitoring system have three mainly goals. One about health, in order to inform the population the quality of the air they breathe. one of control of the pollution in order to enforce policies to control the pollution, and to see the trends of the pollution. And the third one is for the interpretation and information. We can see trends, we can see air quality. A lot of people from university, from USP and other universities use our data to research, to develop models or other things. Next, please. We measure mainly the pollutants that are universally adopted as air quality indicators. PM10 and PM2.5, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and ozone. And we have federal standards, the CONAMA resolution. We have state standards for air quality. And also we use the guidelines of WHO in order to inform the population the air quality. Next, please. Here we can see our stations. We have automatic stations and manual stations. The stations are very modern with the very modern equipments. We use our methodology or procedures adopted for other international agents. And we have, next please, we have in São Paulo state 33 automatic stations that generates about 2,000 data sets a day. We measure this pollutant and also benzene and toluene. And we have also meteorological parameters like wind direction, meeting velocity, and so on. Next, please. We communicate that the stations measure continually the air quality since 1981. We have the data hourly. We measure continually 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. See? Yeah, and we inform the population. We use the air quality index. We have some categories of air quality. When the quality is good, that indicates that we are following the guidelines from WHO for health. When it's attested from the quality is good, the guidelines from WHO are not exceeded. Next, please. This is our network. As I said, we have 63 stations in São Paulo state. That includes 29 in São Paulo Metropolitan area. We have also some manual, about 20, more than 20 manual stations too in the state. Next, please. Here we can see the relative pollution emissions by source in São Paulo metropolitan area. We can see that for CO and hydrocarbons, the light vehicles are the most important source for emission of these pollutants. For NOx is the heavy vehicles. For PM10 too. And for SO2, we have more industrial contribution. Next, please. Here we can see the evolution of the concentration of PM10 in São Paulo metropolitan area. We can see high levels in the 80s and a constant decrease of the concentration due to a lot of policies of control of emissions. We started to use ethanol as fuel in 1979, and here in the 90s we start to improve the control of vehicles, of new vehicles, of emissions for new vehicles. As you can see, you have a big decrease of the concentrations along the time for PM10. Next, please. You have the same profile for for CO. We can see a decrease of the concentrations. The guideline from WHO, that is our standard, air quality standard 2, from 9 ppm 8 hours, is not exceeded in São Paulo metropolitan area since 2008. So we don't have more problems with CO. The main pollutants that we have problems in São Paulo metropolitan area are PM, the PM10 or PM 2.5, and ozone. I think like all big cities. Next, please. Here are the number of days of incidence of ozone standard in São Paulo metropolitan area. We don't, as we know, the formation of the ozone is very related to the meteorological conditions, and we can't observe a trend of the levels of ozone in São Paulo. We have some years with high levels of incidence or others with less, but it's a problem, it's still a problem in São Paulo metropolitan area. Next, please. Here we have a app for mobile devices when we divulgate the air quality on real time for the population. Everyone can see and consult our app and see the air quality. And in our site, our site too, the people can see the air quality, some hints about how to protect from the pollution or other things like this. And when the air quality is good, the guidelines of WHO are not exceeded. Next, please. For innovations in course, we have this year we published a report with the levels of PM1 in São Paulo metropolitan area, and we intended to stand this in 4 sites of the São Paulo metropolitan state, São Paulo metropolitan area, and we intended to measure PM1 in other locations in São Paulo. We plan to increase our VOC monitoring campaigns. We have some, but we plan to increase the kind of campaigns, because the VOCs are precursors from ozone, and some ones are toxics. Next, please. And we have some projects with USP, with Paulo, in order to optimize the spatial distribution of monitoring stations and to see what's the better distribution of the stations in São Paulo metropolitan area, in order to do some predictive models for the main pollutants, ozone and particles, and to make some statistical studies to detect the sensor, to see the sensor fault detection. If you have some problems with some stations or some equipment, to use some tools, statistics tools, in order to prevent the kind of faults. I think is this. Thank you for the attention. If you have questions in the next session. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for everybody for keeping the time. And now we can go for the questions. And we have here some questions. The first one is a question that it says that is for our panelists. It's about the micrometeorology. And the question is from Alexandre Pupo, and he asked, what would be the importance of micrometeorology data, eventually in sub-second and in sub-meter resolutions for research and applications? Sure, he is thinking about the use of micrometeorological data for the analysis in urban areas. I don't know who would like to start. I think maybe Otto Klemm, the Professor Otto Klemm can answer, because he has a sonic anemometer there.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's right. If you want to understand subscale processes, processes which take place on short timescales in small spatial scales, that relates to any interaction between a human being and the environment, because if we are traveling in a city, we are in microenvironments. And if you want to understand our exposure, we need to understand the microenvironment. The microenvironment is defined by the micrometeorology and also by the chemistry in the microscale. So that's why I think it's very important to measure micrometeorological variances and distributions, and also to introduce these data into models which are able to reflect the micrometeorological processes such as turbulence in streets, around buildings, around trees, and everything. So our deeper understanding in the future is definitely based on the understanding of micrometeorological processes. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, I don't know if... Yes, Marcus?
I can comment. I think that's a very good question, actually, because micrometeorology is like us, for example. At this moment, we are working in a specific place, and we can spend the day in a single place. So this is really very important. To do that, I think we would have to have an integration of all the methods we saw and some others even. In the case of what I presented, a single tree just beside your house, for example, or even a plant inside your house could be a sensor of micrometeorology. But there are problems, like, for example, if you use the bark of a tree that is in front of your house, this is cumulative, right? So you would have to have one of the bikes of one of those bikes going around all the time and measuring to have the dynamics, right? Mm-hmm. And so we could have the history on one side. In a single tree, you could have the history, you could have the cumulative effect at that point, and also could have the daily effect, like if you use the bicycle. That could be quite interesting in the future if we could model all that mathematically and with the computers, and even use the AI techniques to foresee what's going to happen in the future, so that people would know maybe CETESB in the future could have not only what's happening now, but what is going to happen in the next few days.
Thank you for that. Yes, that's nice. And I don't know if someone wants to complement this answer related to these micrometeorological parameters or variables.
I can comment in a sense of adding what Mark said about plants. If you choose actually the right tissue, you actually can have integrated information in a long term and also in a short term, because it depends on what the tissue of the plant. And also is important to be the right plant too, of course. But in the case of a tree, you can have the bark or the tissue, the wood, and also flowers or leaves. Some of them grow at a short period of time, some of them longer. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you can obtain a lot of information from just a single individual, and they can provide all that locally.
Yes, it's a very complex, no? And then including all these variables related to fluxes and transport, it can be very difficult to represent all this.
Using these nature-based solutions mixed with the other types of solutions, we could also use, for example, microorganisms. Even the microorganisms that are within us, like the microbiomes, for example. So if we could integrate all that, we would understand a lot. The Germans, I think there is one event that we recorded some years ago. A German scientist, I will see if I find it. A German scientist that came. The Germans are keeping track of the molecules that are inside people. Right? This is another way to see also what's going on with different types of pollution, or the pollution that is in what we drink, in what we eat. So this kind of integration, I think, is where we should aim for.
Related to the work you have done, Marcus, I believe it was last year, came out a publication on honey from Hungarian honey and acacia. Because the Hungarians are quite famous because the acacia honey, it's quite pure. And they use the acacia honey, make a time series of the acacia honey and look at pollutants in honey, because the honey is produced annually, and then they look at the pollutants that pass through the bee to the honey, and then they obtain a time series of what the honey had shown. And the same idea what we had done for the trees and in the bark, how the city has changed in terms of policies limiting pollutants in the honey.
Yeah. Quite interesting, sure. Quite interesting.
Nature-based solutions.
Yes. Or questions. Now I think it's more questions than solutions. I don't know if another point here to complement this question. No? Then, well, we have another question here. This is for Professor Otto. The person says that thank you for the presentation and for presenting the city with so care. And the person says that he thinks that Germany is an example of transport with low emissions, and that the cities have a lot of parks and green areas that make the people like to exercise and walk and live the city. And then it comes the question, what are the challenges or what has been changed in Germany in terms of policy, security and investment with social participation to do this transformation? Some law or action have contributed to this scenario. I don't know if I could translate correctly the question, but it's more or less like this.
I hope I could understand well the question. Germany has some sort of tradition of implementing air pollution control strategies. So the tradition goes back into the 1950s, 60s or 70s, probably, when we had very, very bad air pollution in Europe and specifically in Germany. And since the 1980s, the regulations became more and more strict, and that has been translated into European law, a European Union law, and that translates back into German law. But today it comes from the European Union, the laws, although their true origin is in German thinking, I believe, whatever. There are European laws today which are regulating the emission control of cars, for example, of industry. And these laws and the rules are made more strict and strict over the years. And now we have reached a limit, we have reached a level which is so that a lot of the thresholds are being kept, and no exceedances of thresholds or in many countries for a lot of air pollutants. And not covering all of Europe, but many countries. So I believe it's the regulations which make the progress. Of course, people enjoy it and people take benefit from improvement of air pollution, but it's not the social pressure of individuals or NGOs, or the NGOs do play some role, but it really is basically the European law which really makes a difference.
Yeah, that's.
Fatima, can I just make a comment on that? We have a history with Münster, right? And Julio Chiqueto is directly involved in that. We sent 4 postdocs to Münster for a workshop on cities and climate, and this is sort of a result, one of the results of this connection. Before our postdocs were to be sent to Germany, we invited a German specialist who lives here in São Paulo to talk about the Pacto Federativo, the Federative Pact. And this is another issue that we have in the Center of Synthesis that is really very important. Germany has a completely different federative pact in comparison to Brazil. Brazil is very federalized. So to implant a policy, a new policy, it's much more difficult for a city, for the locals, like the state, for example. It's much more difficult in Brazil than it is in Germany. So besides the rules that are very important, I think this is also a defect that we have in relation to Germany. And we learned that this happened after the war. They had this opportunity to change it. They changed it very well, so that their state and their cities are more free to make their own decisions in comparison to what we do in Brazil. I think this plays a role in why Germany is capable to do things. It's not only that, but this plays an important role in our opinion.
Yeah. Thank you for complimenting. Now we have a question for Marilyna. The question is there policy or integrated policy in São Paulo with other states? And this is because the air pollution from other states can influence São Paulo, like for instance biomass burning and coming from the central part of Brazil or from Amazonia. How is this integrated policy or this integrated administration of this policy? And also, what can be done to reduce the ozone concentrations?
We have some federal regulations about air quality. We have the IBAMA, that's the federal agents for environmental in Brazil. And each state has its one policy about air quality. And I think the federal government makes sometimes some policies. Well, we have federal policies and we have state policies, and these policies are integrated. About the ozone levels, to reduce the ozone levels, ozone is a challenge in all countries, in all mega cities in the world, and to reduce the ozone levels, you have to reduce the VOC, the concentrations. Make some policies to reduce, sometimes change the contents of some compounds in the fuel, or to controlling emissions from the VOCs in the vehicles, in the gasoline stations. And you have to make control to the NOx also, from the burning, from the industries, from the vehicles. You have to have policies in order to control the ozone precursors. But it's a challenge for all big cities in the world.
Marilyna, I'd like to ask if this planning for measurements of these VOCs that CETESB is planning to do is to increase the number of VOCs, or also the number of stations, to put more stations and start measuring the VOCs that you put in your last slide?
We have some stations measuring automatically benzene and toluene, mainly in the cities with high industrialization, like Paulínia, São José dos Campos, Cubatão, that cities with refineries of petroleum, and also in São Paulo. But we had also some measurements here in São Paulo, and we plan to increase the number of VOCs. We measure actually 17 different VOCs, and that's important to see the ozone precursors, because VOCs are ozone precursors, but also because some VOCs like benzene are toxic. So we have two goals in this kind of monitoring.
Yeah, thank you. Really nice. We have here one question for Professor Marcos. How to relate the results of the metals in the trees with the air quality standards and the air quality standards to protect the health? How to relate these metals that you measure in the trees with the air quality standards? And in the industrial area where the metals were measured, they indicate the present pollution or the past pollution.
Thank you for the question. The correlation, we need to correlate with the air pollution directly. What's in the wood, for example, or in the bark. We need CETESB's data. This is really very important to use the CETESB's data to validate. So we do that all the time. We do this kind of comparisons to see whether the type of metals that we are measuring are metals that are really present in the atmosphere. And the second question, sorry, I forgot. Is
no, if it's the measurement of the metals is related the measurement is related to the present concentrations or to the past concentrations?
In the case of the
metals in the industrial.
Is the past. So we did both. We used the bark to measure what was there at the moment of the collection of the bark. So this is the present at the time, right? At the time of collection, and we used the wood to see the history. So again, the wood tells us the tree rings. They tell us the history. We can look backwards. Even before, as you saw, before the 80s, before CETESB started to measure. So we can go, if, depending on the age of the tree, we can go on average in São Paulo 60 years back. Depending on the type of tree, there are some trees that are older, other species. We are preparing a publication on that as well. Then they can be 80 years old. So we can do both. But again, as I said before, only the integration of the different data would really lead us to a model that could tell the story of what happened and what is happening.
Oh, thank you. Very nice. I also have a question for Guaciara related to the hotspots you found in Rio de Janeiro that is not in this middle of the city, but do you think it's related to that industrial parks there? To the
one close to Volta Redonda?
Yes, and that.
Yeah, we took samples several kilometers away from the cluster, but yeah, it could be possible, and also very heavy traffic, because where you have industrial clusters also have a lot of movement of goodies, right, that come in and out. But you also can have these plumes coming from outside of the state as well. So one thing, our next step is a follow-up on this that I want to do with Julio. We already started, is looking into the socioeconomic relationships with this particular map. But outside the state, we had a more dispersed points than localized, because we inside the urban metropolitan area of Rio, we have much more sites that we investigated than outside. We were, in fact, surprised with that very high point closer to in Volta Redonda, although it was not exactly outside of the cluster, the industrial cluster, was in a residential area. So, but certainly getting some of that influence of the traffic. And if you have trucks using diesel movement in and out, although Brazil is a champion in terms of using biofuel, blending biofuel into the in gasoline and diesel as well, but it's still, because this technique, it tells only the information of a fossil fuel. It cannot tell anything about bio, because it will match with the bio information. So it was quite surprising why it's so high there, and also in a valley, but it's very hard to find the vegetation we were looking for in the mountains, because then we had to find somebody that could hike and go, going to Serra do Mar in locations that it was hard to access. Yeah. So, yeah.
Very interesting, because but even if it's contribution from, for instance, from refinery, it also appears in this fossil fuel or refinery.
Yeah, will appear in and any company or refinery or that use fossil fuel. And if they don't say so, disclose or what, that kind of sort, they will show, because isotopes cannot lie, so they will show. Yeah,
because there they have more than in São Paulo. They have more impact from refineries in Rio de Janeiro, I think, also. No?
Yeah, I was quite surprised about that too. São Paulo has been more effective to move it to more cleaner kind of renewable energy than Rio de Janeiro. Rio de Janeiro has been behind on that, at least until 2015. I don't know now.
Yes.
But, yeah.
I didn't mention because of legal problems, but the industrial sector that was a refinery, right? What I showed.
Oh, okay, the cluster.
So the cluster is a refinery as well. So it's the same thing as Guaciara is saying in there. So she's probably picking up more or less what we picked up.
Yes. Yeah. That's true. Yes.
Yeah, even when we do this kind of a work here in California, we occasionally have some surprises as well, because we do environment work with isotopes and in places that it should be relatively clean, even parks and so on. You can find both. You can find very depleted or tracer very high, because tracer happen when it's medical waste that is supposed to be burned in right places. So, but then they go and cheat it and burn in a park, in the areas they should not burn the waste, and then you have high peaks of carbon-14 there. Yeah. So we find that a lot in particulate matter, aerosol. We find that.
Now you can apply the same technique to the samples of particulate on the
particulates. Yes, we run here. We have a program in particulates, actually. Yeah, here we have been doing some work with Paulo Artacho, but right now we have been getting filters from him, but from the Otto Tower in Amazon. Yeah. Because there are some requirements for the filters. The filters need to be quartz filters, and from clean airs, the requirement is so-and-so level of concentration. And if the place is very clean, you need to be there for several days. And it has to be baked, of course, the filter before being placed to collect the particulates. But, it's also very interesting to obtain from the cities.
Okay.
Can I have one question?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Oh, okay. It's
I have a couple too.
Okay. Because I didn't have time to put it in the email account.
No.
It's for Professor Otto Klemm. Yeah. So when you show your a bicycle device, which I thought was pretty awesome. Yeah, I really like that. So you collected some of the information on PM10 and show the two circuits, the cleaner and the traffic one. But I don't know if it was exactly at the same time you had the video. You mentioned that the trees was depleted without leaves, so I assume it was winter, right?
Yeah.
Because okay. Yeah. So if it was winter, is it possible that the results was similar because rather than be have heavy traffic, the PM signal during winter is more from biomass burning? Is there an effect of people burning wood in fireplaces during the winter because it's cold?
Not much in Germany. It's almost completely forbidden to do that for a number of reasons. There are some fireplaces which are still legal in homes, but even they have to install filters and everything, and that's because of the air pollution. So there has been very strong and efficient regulations over the past few years. But there's another effect. We also made measurements in the summer, and during one of the rides on the promenade, which is a low traffic route, we had very high particle number concentrations, and that was last year in April, and that was a time when the flowers were blooming. One of the first really warm and sunny days, and we had a lot of emissions of VOCs from the plants and particle formation, new particle formation, secondary particle formation. So we had huge number concentrations on the promenade, which has a lot of trees, and less on the traffic route. So that was very surprising, and even that can happen, you know. So if you do it over the year again and again and again, you have a lot of surprising effects, and that was one of them. But biomass burning is not really an issue, not in town, no. And open fireplaces, outside garden burning is totally forbidden. Does not happen.
Okay. Well, I would suggest to maybe use radiocarbon actually to try to see the difference between one path to another. Not too many samples, of course, but you cannot do that with running the bicycle, actually. You have to have a sampler and will be for several days in one location and the other one in another location to capture what is the contribution from one path and the other path. And, you know, and basically just few samples, because radiocarbon is still a little bit costly.
Yes, you mean radiocarbon in CO2, right?
No, radiocarbon PM.
In PM?
Yeah.
Okay.
But then you need, again, you need to have the collecting a sampler, and has to have being quartz filters.
Yeah.
You have to look into that, how to sample.
Well, you're right. We did think about doing this, but there are so many obstacles. You know, it's not so much the filters itself or the samplers, but the analysis and the money and the time and everything. So it's hard to convince people to contribute to financing these kind of activities. But that's a very good idea.
I'm sure there are some colleagues doing PM in Europe. I have just to think exactly where. Maybe put you in contact.
Yeah, would be good. Thank you.
Fatima, I have a follow-up question to Professor Otto. That was just winter what you did, or you did the summer as well. And another question is, you have two routes, right, that you use. But for example, if you allow the bicycle to go randomly inside the circle, for example, maybe you could construct a more a bidimensional map or of the particulate matter.
Yes, actually, I also did that during some of the activities. Then you have a more complete map, but this map is only valid for this specific day, specific wind direction, wind speed, and boundary layer stability, and so on. If you do it next day or even 2 hours later, the map looks very much different. So that's why our strategy is to make repeated measurements many times, and then try to exclude not really exclude, but to fight with other competing processes through the high number of samples that we are taking. So that is the idea, and I know there are also other ideas which could be fruitful, but this is our plan. Yeah.
For the summer versus winter, I was interested in when the trees have leaves, for example. Do these leaves interfere in the particular?
They may limit the transport of air pollutants, such as particles from the street into the promenade, because the housing of the promenade with trees, which have leaves in the summertime, is quite dense, and it's with shadow throughout, and there may be an effect. That's one of the effects which is important. Yeah. Actually, these trees also hinder the ventilation of the city, because they have a green wall, so to say, around the city center, and the air cannot go in and out to fight the urban heat island effect, and also to fight the high air pollution levels in town. So the exchange of air is hindered by these dense tree lines. So I'm not proposing to take the trees down.
Please don't.
I don't dare to say that.
Are there more questions? I have one for Elena.
Okay.
That maybe Fatima can help as well. Is whether you mentioned that Brazil started to use ethanol, and São Paulo particularly use a lot of ethanol. As Guaciara said, maybe São Paulo city is one of the cities in Brazil that use ethanol as a biofuel. The decrease of pollution that you mentioned there, the PMs, etc. Do these have a relationship, even partially, with the use of ethanol? Can we see the role of ethanol in this decrease or not?
We can't see the whole as a edge of a difference. Start to use ethanol and the pollution drop immediately. But ethanol has the use of ethanol has influence in the levels of the drop of levels of PM, and also at the beginning at CO. Nowadays, the limit of the vehicles from ethanol and gasoline are almost the same. For new vehicles, the limits of emission are almost the same. But I believe ethanol, the use of ethanol is one of the factors of the drop of the pollution. But you have also the better control in the industrial emissions. We'll have the new limits for the vehicles with PROCONV, that's the program for new emission of vehicles, and PROMOTE is the program for motorcycles. We have also for PM10 the use of gas as industrial fuel, because you have with the gas ball, we have an increase of in the use of gas in the industries. That's reduce also instead of oil, instead of diesel or combustion oil. So I think it's a lot of factors that contribute to this drop of the pollution.
Yes,
but ethanol, the use of ethanol is one of them.
And also the regulation for the trucks, for the diesel vehicles. The regulation for the diesel vehicles also helped a lot, decreasing the particles, the concentration of particles. Now I think this is another point, no?
Because most of the production is from diesel, right? And also,
yes, yeah.
Can you see the difference of when we changed the rules for the trucks to enter the city? When we have these limits of time, this is significant, or for
mainly for vehicles from diesel, for heavy vehicles, we have a long time to change the vehicle, to renew the fleet. We don't buy a big truck every year. The vehicles are old, so it takes a time to see the effects of the changes of the emission limits in the air quality. Mainly for heavy-duty vehicles. For level vehicles, it's easier, but it's faster. But for heavy vehicles, you have more time to see the influence in the air quality.
but at some streets that we change the behavior of the diesel vehicles, like close to the airport in Bandeirantes, it's possible to see the difference in the profile of the pollutants. Yes, if you avoid the big trucks and the trucks inside the city, we can see this difference, mainly in NOx and particles. Yes, because they are.
I wonder if you heard about the diesel scandal we had in Germany and also in the United States. You heard about it, right? When they had to introduce the SCR converters. They put them in, but the software switched them off when the cars were on the road. Then it was discovered, and the long story I don't want to tell because it's an interesting but long story. And now they are forced to have them active. And that happened about 2 years ago. And the effect of this enforcement can be seen in statewide air pollution statistics in NOx, not in PM, but in NOx. It's not a huge drop, but a few percent clearly coincide with the enforcement of the use of the catalytic converters. They had been in the cars, were just switched on, and that could be seen. Yeah.
No, it's true. Yeah, when you have change in these heavy-duty vehicles, we see it's because they are the main sources. Also here in São Paulo, I think 60% of NOx comes from diesel, and then it's very important to control the diesel emissions. That's true. And well, I don't know if someone wants to make some comments.
Yeah, I want to make another comment if you allow. It's about ozone. We touched ozone a little bit, and the ozone chemistry is very complex. And but in inner cities, the ozone is eaten up by the fresh NOx emissions, by the gasoline cars and the diesel cars, and probably also by the ethanol cars. So for these reasons, in Germany, probably all over Europe, in the city centers, ozone is not even measured because there's so little ozone, it's close to zero. We have urban ozone holes, if you want, and everything. But what will come? What will come is electrification of the street traffic. So within, I don't know how many years, maybe 15 years or so, maybe 20, I don't know, we will replace a lot of diesel cars, gasoline cars in Brazil or Sao Paulo, also the ethanol cars, by electric cars, by battery cars. And then the urban ozone sink will not be as efficient anymore. So we may have increasing ozone concentrations in cities due to this process. Mm-hmm. I'm quite sure that this will happen.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you don't have vehicles, or electric vehicles, we don't generate COVs, that's a precursor of ozone too. You have the NOx that consume the ozone, but you need also the COVs. If you don't use fossil fuels, you don't have COVs, at least from the vehicles. I don't know if the level of ozone will rise with electrical.
Yeah, but this is a good idea for simulations, huh?
Yes,
that's a good idea, because then we can. The problem is to represent correctly the other sources, like the vegetation, the transport from long range transport. But if we do this, we can see the effect of changing out for the electric vehicles, and then having only the contributions from the vegetation, from the VOCs from the vegetation, and also from the long range transport. Right. Probably we are going to see here because of the biomass burning. Because this we have this contribution from biomass burning. We can note this contribution, but you see, in São Paulo it's very complex because the number of vehicles is so high that probably we are going to see this decrease in ozone. No, it would be really nice because you see during the COVID last year. We have really only 2 weeks that it was only 2 weeks that we had here a lockdown. After that lockdown that was in March, April, then after that we start to have again the traffic. Not as the same, but it was not like that. It's 2 weeks that was here in lockdown that we had a reduction of, I think it was 30% in the light vehicles. And then what we noted was the increase in ozone at some stations, but other places that is not, we saw the increase more in the central stations that we had this effect of consuming by NOx. We saw this increase, but it was not general, like, because we saw many papers discussing that it was increasing ozone in the places, but it was not like that, because when we looked at each station, we noticed that some stations we had this increase, but another no. Then it's not so easy, the chemistry. I agree, it's not so easy. It was like an example. We saw it's like a lab during this lockdown. Because we saw many papers in all the world saying that the ozone increased, but it was not like that if you look to each station. It depends on the characteristics of the station. At least here.
Just a comment regarding electrification. We have to be careful because we are just transferring the pollution to another. We are taking the pollution that we already know about, and we could have filters, etc. But when we are going to have the pollution that will come from the batteries. Or from the way we produce electricity. Like, for example, in Brazil, we do a lot of hydroelectrics. 80% of our energy matrix is very clean. But if we have a higher demand of electricity, we are going to have to use thermoelectrics, in that will produce particulate matter a lot, and this particulate matter could end up in the cities or in our lungs. So there is a lot of fuzz about the electrification, but I think people are not thinking hard enough of the type of pollution that electrification could produce in the future.
Well, the answer to that is wind power. Wind power, wind energy.
Wind and solar. We have also solar here.
Wind has also problems. We don't have wind everywhere. I think the bicycles seem to be. Would you say that the bicycles produce any kind of pollution? Because you have a 300,000 people city there, and you show that, I don't know what's the percentage of people running in bicycles. I've never been to Münster, but when you go to Copenhagen, for example, it's absolutely amazing, or even China, right? But
it's comparable to Copenhagen.
You're similar to Copenhagen.
Yeah. So each inhabitant here has, on average, I think, 4 bicycles. They don't run it all the time, of course. Yeah. But so the mobility share is like 35% or so of the ways taken is by bicycle. So it's a very large percentage in Münster.
But there is some pollution, for example, heavy metals that are produced due to the metal.
Yeah, of course there is some pollution, but it must be much less than in any car, because there's much less energy involved and kinetic energy on braking and everything.
But it has never been calculated.
I don't think so. I'm not sure.
Well, we have questions. Julio wants to make some questions. Please, Julio, take your time.
Well, actually, we are already 15 minutes or past our, closing time. So I think the discussion is really, really interesting, and I'm just learning a lot from everyone here. But I would just like to make a few comments on the topics that were brought up. Concerning Fatima's question to Guaciara about the hotspots of CO2 in the state of Rio de Janeiro, those outside the metropolitan area of Rio de Janeiro, we suspect it could be due to transport of CO2 from the neighboring regions of the Juiz de Fora in Minas Gerais, because there's a lot of industries there, and also from the Paraíba Valley in São Paulo. If you look at the hotspots, one is to the west, and the other one is to the west, the other one's to the north. So they are kind of close to these neighboring states' industrial areas. So, I mean, we cannot prove that, but at least that's our suspicion, based on, we will have to make a more specific climatological study for to know the transport of the CO2. But we suppose it could be due to that as well. And concerning the ozone and the lack of emissions and the increase of ozone, I actually published a paper last year about urban mobility conditions in São Paulo and the ozone pollution. And we modeled a few different scenarios. And in one of them, we just removed emissions from the downtown area and we just didn't change the rest of the emissions. So we kind of like simulated how it would be if there were no cars running in downtown. And that actually led to the increase of ozone, because you still have all cars running around the metropolis. So these ozone get all the precursors, and the ozone produced outside of this downtown area will be transported there. So there will be like an increase because you don't have the NOx to remove it, right? But of course, we still need to improve that simulation, because we just included the transport emissions. We didn't include the biological emissions or the industrial emissions, which are also play a role. But one thing that we noted is that in one scenario, we changed the hour of the day in which the vehicles were driving. Because for ozone, because we need sunlight to break the molecule and create ozone, we modeled one of the scenarios was using a different hour of the day. So we kind of decreased the vehicle circulation during the most sunny hours of the day. And that was the scenario which mostly led to the decrease in ozone. If you put the cars out after the sun is out, so you don't have the photolysis going on. So yeah, that was interesting, but it still needs a lot of improvements, especially in the modeling part, to include other sources, other aspects. But yeah, that was an interesting result we got. And well, unfortunately, I would like to finish our event. I could go on talking and listening to you, but I would like to thank everyone for coming. Your presentations were brilliant. And especially Marilyna, who came in such a rush, we didn't expect, but we are deeply thankful for everyone, and also for Jessica and Thelmo and Professor Lindo, who helped me to create this event and to put this into practice. And yeah, that's it. And if anyone has any more comments.
Thank you very much, Julio, to invite me. And yeah, it was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been great. I just put it in the chat. It's a great meeting, really good discussion. And thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. We expect to have opportunity to continue this discussion in the future. It was very productive, and thank you for the invitation.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for participating before Professor Marx finished. And also there is a question for me that's true, Professor Otto. Yes, we had some work together. Yeah, that's true. But nowadays we don't meet in person, then we don't know how it is. Thank you very much.
Well, I would like, as coordinator, Julio, did you say what you wanted to say about the meeting already, or you would like to say more words?
No, I'm happy. I'm happy now.
That was really fascinating. Fascinating, the discussion. It's very nice to have Professor Otto. Thank you very much for giving us your time. Jaciara, Elena, and the dear Fatima, our dear friend Fatima, which is one of the best we have in the country working on this. Thank you very much, Fatima, for participating. And Julio, congratulations. I think it went very well. Your idea and I know how much Telmo helps as well. Thank you, Telmo. Thank you, Jessica. Now, then we are going to have a text that will be in English, right, Julio, or English and Portuguese, probably. We will see. We are going to have a text that will be written by our three observers. They will write a text reporting about the event, and hopefully, well, maybe you could produce something that could be an article in Portuguese for people with a point of view, instead of only reporting what is already in the video, right? And if you produce something that could be sent to the speakers, it could be a general article from all of us. That would be quite interesting to leave a point of view. This is one thing that we like very much in the Center of Synthesis, is the result of the inter and transdisciplinarity. This is a very important subject. This connection with Germany, we keep learning more and more about Germany. Comparing Brazil and Germany seems crazy for certain people, but it's really a comparison that helps a lot in many different sectors. I think we learn a lot, but also Germany learns a little with what Brazil is doing as well. So we could maybe leave, Julio, an emergent property, an emergent connection of all that you saw in the form of a text that links the ideas all together.
Yes, definitely.
With this, I will end here and finish thanking everybody that was watching as well, everybody that made questions as well. You all participated. Thank you very much. I hope to have a second run of this type of meeting, Julio. It's in your hands.
All right.
Cheers all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.